Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the Education Assistant here at the Arboretum, and today we are right by a rain garden by our rose garden because we have a program for you today, how to plant a rain garden. We've got our Director of Horticulture, Paige here, as well as our research technician, Villani. They are all kinds of excited because there's a rain garden coming up in the future. So we're thinking rain gardens, we're thinking rain garden plants, or maybe we're laughing because I'm operating on outdated information. But regardless, this should be a valuable program. Those of you watching this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I'll pass things over to Greg and Evan to tell us a little bit about how to plant a rain garden.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining. This is something that's been near and dear to me for a while. I've got some history with rain gardens. We've got a good one here, and wanted to kind of lay out a little bit what we're going to talk about. This is our version of our rain garden. This is not a how-to. We are not rain garden installation experts. We have adapted some of the requirements for a rain garden to take a space of some troubled spot in the gardens, either that are too wet or too dry, places where we have water, and that's what we want to talk about today. So we'll talk about kind of the why of what we have, and Evan and I will end things up with some of the plants that we have chosen. And the first thing you need to ask is, why do you need a rain garden? And most of them are put in to manage wet spots in the garden. They're used to manage dry spots, places that might be low, places where you have water runoff, either from just regular rain incidents or storm, bigger types of situations. And they're a good resource to collect that water, filter that water with plants, keep that water from going into a drain system, and it all kind of stays on site, which is a good thing. And it's something that we promote. It's something that our partner gardens promote, and our friends at Raleigh Wastewater really promote. So that's the main thing and the main reason. It's also for us, we're a small but mighty garden, and it allows us to increase our plant diversity by using pallets of plants that can take those wet and sometimes, most of the time, extremely dry situations. It also is a way for us to use different layers of plants. There's herbaceous things that do well. There's woody things that do well. There's lots of trees that do well. But keep in mind the scale of those plants when you're designing your garden. And we'll talk about that in more detail as we single out the plants in particular. If you're a native plant person, this is a great opportunity for native plants. There's lots of natives that do well in rain garden situations. And for me, my mantra in garden life is multiple season of interest, winter, spring, summer, fall. You can do that very successfully with rain gardens. Thinking about requirements for rain gardens, you might have a sunny site, you might have a shady site. Somewhere in between, there are a palette of plants that check all of those boxes. Sometimes in sunny and shade situations, things can go back and forth. There's lots of things to choose from. The big thing with rain gardens is the soil that you use. You want something that's going to both filter the soil very well, but also keep it there. So working with your native soils and things to kind of keep it in those low areas so that the plants can do their jobs of absorbing and using that water and filtering it. Traditionally, rain gardens have very structured, manufactured soils. There's lots of guidelines depending on what part of the country that you might live in. There's a ton of stuff online if you just kind of Googled and looked that up. We have made our own structural soil here. It's a combination of stay-lite and our native soils. So kind of a basic recipe for good drainage and allowing plants to filter and to take advantage of those situations. And just thinking about those soils that are going to be able to handle wet and dry, and sometimes at the same time. And I'm going to let my partner in crime talk about some of the plant species and those sorts of things.
All right, so how do you choose a good plant for a rain garden? Like Greg said, these are well-draining soils, so a lot of the time, that initial layer, which is designed to let water pass through in that first first bit of flooding so that it can collect as much water as possible, that's going to get dry all the times that it's not raining. So what kind of plants will do well in these areas? There's certain characteristics that you might look for. A deep or a wide root system, a root system that has its own water retaining structure. And then it's good to combine plants with different root systems so that they can pick up different niches, and all together there's a nice structural element under the soil. Another thing you want is plants that are resistant to root rot. If something is going to not be able to take sitting in water for 24 hours, it doesn't matter if it can stand being dry 364 days a year. On that one day where it's sitting in water the whole day, if it dies then, it's kaput. Another thing we think about is the layers of plant material. So as Greg mentioned, there's herbaceous stuff, which tends to be pretty low to the ground, and we're using that stuff to minimize the bare soil. So we almost want to look into a rain garden and not be able to see bare soil with our eyes. And then building up for diversity and layers of interest, we have shrubs and trees. That will also depend on the size of your rain garden. But this all contributes to community complexity. And a rain garden that has a high diversity of species will be able to withstand the changes in environment. And you want your rain garden to be kind of low maintenance because it's a dense area, and it's just mostly you just want to let it do its thing. You don't have to get in there too much, but that isn't going to stop you from making edits year to year, because some things will die. Some things will make an attempt to take over, and then there's other things that are just cool, and you're like, well, I want to put that in there. And like I said, that community complexity will help in the long run, because the diversity of species will make it so that it can withstand both the fluctuations in temperature through the year and dryness. It's probably one of the most volatile areas in the garden, because you're playing with the factor of wetness a lot more and the normal temperature swings. So you could hit cold and dry, cold and wet, hot and dry, hot and wet more often. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a wide range of conditions.
And the final point I'll make before we get into the specific plants that we're talking about today is that rain gardens are a great habitat. So Greg mentioned native species. There's a lot of species that we'll talk about today that a lot of insects will use, a lot of pollinators will use these. So it's something that contributes to local ecology. And you can even leave dead material in the rain garden for an amount of time for winter interest and for overwintering insects, as long as you're okay with that aesthetically. So we're going to start at the herbaceous layer and work our way up in terms of plant species. So I'll talk about the first plant that we picked out. That's Juncus. Now this is a genus, and there's lots of good species within the genus. It's a grass-like evergreen perennial that can be low growing, but some clumps get up to 3 feet tall. It's a nice tight clumper. It's just a nice structural element for the rain garden.
And in that theme of Juncus and grass-like plants, that's a really good base layer for things, because there's a lot of things that can take that wet, dry. One of the plant groups that I wanted to talk about was carex. There are a ton of different carex that handle those wet situations really well. One that I've used in other gardens and one that we have here is Carex squarosa, the narrow-leaf cattail sedge, and it gets that name because of a really interesting fruiting structure that looks like cattails. And it can take really, really wet situations. It does extremely well in shade, which fits a niche in a lot of different rain gardens. If you've got areas of your garden that stay wet and are in the shade of bigger trees, carex are a plant you really want to look at and think about. Carex squarosa gets about 3 feet by 3 feet, so a really nice mound. It's a great ground cover, mostly evergreen. You can cut it back in the spring if you like, but it's kind of a plant it and forget about it plant. One of my favorites to use in these kinds of situations.
Next, we'll talk about the Louisiana iris, which is actually a taxonomic group I just learned of 5 different species of iris: brevicollis, fulva, giganticirella, hexagona, and nelsonii. Say that 5 times fast. I can't.
I don't think so.
But between those species, what's really cool is they all readily hybridize with each other. So there's a lot of cultivars available, and you might end up with some interesting crosses in your own garden, which is pretty exciting. Other than that though, because of all that variety, they come in a variety of colors and heights. So this is a really nice, like a little bit of a chaotic and fun element for your springtime interest. You can put in multiple members of this group or hybrids and cultivars and just watch and see what they do. They'll bloom at slightly different times. They'll have different colors. And then year round, I personally really enjoy iris foliage. It's a nice fan of that waxy green blue. And so I think it adds a lot to the garden. I don't actually know this. How do they orient themselves? Can you plant them in different orientations?
I don't know, but I'm glad you said that about the foliage, because that's what the plant looks like most of the time. And I'll take fall color wherever I can find it. And a lot of irises have really good yellow fall color. And even the brown foliage to me is nice as it kind of dies down before you clean it up. And it's a great refuge for insects and other critters. But that's something to consider with these things is, yes, you get bloom time, but you also have that kind of dormant where things may not be blooming, and how that's going to affect the garden that they're planted in. I'm glad that you mentioned that.
And the last thing I was going to say about these irises were they're lovers of the roadside ditch, in terms of these are tough plants. They're gonna do well in your rain garden.
Yeah. Keep going in that herbaceous layer theme. Physostegia virginiana, obedient plant, is one that I've used a lot in wet areas. We have it here. That is, it can take sun or shade. It is, as far as I know, deer resistant. Deer don't nibble on it yet, as of today at 324. But that's a good thing to kind of think about and consider. It's called obedient plant because I think you can bend the flowers in any direction and they'll kind of stay that. Tim and I were talking about this plant earlier. It is everything but obedient in the garden because it spreads like crazy. There's a white flowered form that's a little more well-behaved that I've used in rain gardens and wet areas, but it scares me because it wants to run, it wants to go.
And when we say it spreads like crazy, that often has a negative connotation, but it's really good at filling nooks and crannies.
Yes.
So it depends how you use it.
And in a rain garden situation, Evan mentioned you want to cover that soil, and this is definitely a plant that can do that. And we'll talk about as we go on too, one of the downsides of rain gardens, and Evan mentioned this, where some things are really happy and aggressive, some things fail miserably, and they kind of fill those niches, and it gives you an opportunity to kind of redo. And we've been talking about that with our garden.
Yeah, once or twice a year, walking in, seeing what kind of populations you might keep in check, what things you might need to add, things like that.
Yep.
Monarda fistulosa. This is one of our natives. It's a lover of well-drained soil, so it might be a little bit more for the edges of the rain garden. That's something we also wanted to mention. A rain garden kind of has 2 or 3 parts. There's the very bottom where water is sitting for the longest, and then it's kind of a scale all the way up to the edges, which are the least different from the, sorry, I'm not gonna hit you. I won't. the least different from the grade at level. And so those are getting inundated with more water during rains, but they dry out more quickly than what's at the bottom. So this Monarda fistulosa would be a nice touch around the edges of the rain garden.
Yeah.
It's a great late summer flower. Yeah, summer fall blooms. It's a pollinator attractor. It makes a nice cut flower. And as a bonus, it's a scratch and sniff plant. As you know, bee balms smell pretty lovely. And it's very tolerant. It's one of those that's resistant to root rot and most of our like viruses, diseases. So it's a pretty tough plant.
Yeah, that's a very strong favorite of mine. Baptisia australis. What's the common name for that? Just went out of my head. False indigo. Thank you, Blake. It's not one of my favorite plants. Tim and I were talking bad about it earlier today. It blooms relatively fast and then it's kind of gone, but it's a tough plant, kind of for that edge that Evan mentioned in rain gardens. It can take that dry, it can take a little bit of wet. It does better in sun, but it can take a little bit of shade. The foliage is kind of a nice blue-green. It sets these really kind of attractive, dark, chocolatey brown seed pods that will persist through the end of the summer and into the fall. and it's a really easy plant to clean up because it just kind of it dries up, and you can bunch it up and remove it if need be. But it's a really, really tough plant for that kind of a plant it and forget about it situation. So I like to recommend it for these sorts of things. They don't all have to be my favorites. There's a lot of people that really like it. Comes in a wide range of colors, heights, but it's a good plant for that kind of that edge of mystery in this kind of a situation.
And a big color pop, which
Yep.
is nice around the edge. You make the edge probably prettier than the center.
Yep.
As a whole. Liatris spicata. So this is another native beneficial plant. This is also another one that I planted with the Monarda at the berm swales. So it's another kind of area that is rain garden adjacent, water retention adjacent. So an area where water is flowing through in times of a rain. So this Liatris spicata is one that packs a pretty powerful purple punch in summer. Yes, with their tall purple flower spikes. So this is one that's more effective in mass. If you just plant one or two, you know, it's a nice touch. But if you plant a clump and you let it clump and you get all these spikes, I mean, you'll see it. It's another nice looking flower, and our native bees like to nest in the base of it. So if you do want to cut it back in winter, you just leave 12 inches, and that gives them plenty of material to nest with. That's all I wanted to say for that.
It's a good companion. It's good. It plays nice with its neighbors. It's a really good plant for that sort of stuff. Jumping back into some grass-like plants, Andropogon virginicus, our native broom sedge. We've got it here in our rain garden, and we usually don't cut it back to leave that color of those spent last season's flowers and seed pods up. This time of the year, I like it because as the sun gets lower in the sky, the grasses look really, really pretty this time of the year, and they also provide a lot of movement. It is a tough, bad soil plant, great for ditches, wet areas, does better in sun, but can take a little bit of shade. It's just one of my favorite kind of native grasses for really kind of tough, plant it and forget about it situations.
And another plant for tough, forget about it, wet, anything areas is canna. Most any canna, and we talked about this. We could talk about cannas. We could probably do a whole talk on cannas because there's just the whole variety of foliage versus flowers, heights, textures. But we're not going to get super into the weeds of that today. But it is a super tough plant. I mean, this hot and wet summer was like perfect for them, especially I planted some in the South American garden in this little ditch, which had like a hard pan clay base because it used to be a bog garden 17 years ago or something. But I planted 3 quarts there, and now it's like this huge clump that I'm gonna have to take a pickaxe to in spring and really just knock that sucker back. But yeah, a really unkillable, tough plant. And then I was just gonna throw out Bengal Tiger is one cultivar it's tough. It's got a lot of foliar interest. So just looking around at those, and you can do a lot visually in terms of just canna species.
And we were talking earlier about cannas in general, and that's another plant that has a long season of bloom, but you're looking at that foliage a lot longer. And Evan's right, we could do a whole talk just on cannas, because there's some that I like just for the foliage. If they never flowered, I'd be okay with that. But that's another good plant that plays well with others. The last one I want to talk about from a herbaceous standpoint, Hibiscus coccineus. It's one of our native hibiscus. I like the foliage of it. It's a little more delicate than some of the garden varieties and the ones that have been hybridized. In true hibiscus form, they bloom for maybe a day or so, and then another one will come up behind, and then another. So it has kind of a long blooming cycle. I like the foliage as it gets to this time of the year. Gets kind of yellows and like greens in it. And don't have to do much with this one. It can take wet soil. It's good for any part of that rain garden down close to where it stays wet. It can take heavy soils, but it needs sun to kind of do its thing.
And the last herbaceous plant that I want to talk about is Eryngium. So Eryngium is a plant that I've learned a lot about over the years of working here. First thing Tim told me is that it's in the same family as carrots. surprising. And then from visually, it just looks like kind of like a Dazzlerian or an agave, with the fact that it has these very long, monocot, spiky leaves. So I was like, this plant surely likes dry territories. And in fact, it can grow in pretty poor soils, pretty rocky soils. But Mark, in his Uruguay trip, when he was collecting Eryngium like pandanifolium, he was wading through water to get to those species, which is, I was like, no way. But yes, why? So this is something that can take dry and wet. Our native Eryngium is Eryngium yuccifolium. It'll probably like a little bit more of the edge. It doesn't love being inundated with water, but it could probably take in the center, but the edge is where it would do best. But something that you could put in the center for a big impact is Eryngium pandanifolium. That's like a 6-foot clump, like massive textural element that you could stick in there, and it might never die. I don't know.
Yeah,
could outlive me.
They're tough plants, really tough plants. So we're going to jump into shrubs and trees, kind of that woody layer. And I think we did this in a way that we kind of work our way up from a height perspective. You're the first one up.
I'm up again. So this is a certified classic, the Cephalanthus occidentalis, the button bush. It can tolerate some shade and some dryness, but if you give it wetness and if you give it sun, you'll see why it's called the button bush. In spring, it has this beautiful and cute flower show of little white, perfect globe flowers. It's really cute, and it can tolerate even up to 3 feet of standing water. This is another native, so I would say go ahead and try this in your rain garden.
And there's a lot of interest in this from a native plant perspective, and there's a lot of developing of new cultivars. The flowers remind me of little Sputniks, or it looks like the COVID virus too.
Yeah.
But it's super, super tough, can take dry. I'm a big fan of hollies, and you typically think of hollies doing well in kind of wet situations. One of the ones that we have in our garden are some of the deciduous ones, Ilex verticillata, little goblin red, I think is the one that we have in the little garden right across from us. That's a great plant. Evan mentioned things that attract wildlife, birds like the fruit, and those fruit are turning bright red as we speak. That's a plant that can take wet, it can take the dry. They look good in clumps because you get more bang for your buck with multiple setting of that really pretty red fruit. Nice dark green leaves through the growing season. They fade to kind of a yellow brown and fall off in the late fall winter, where you can really see those fruits as kind of a highlight. Different heights of them, many different types of cultivars. The one that we have is a small one, hence the name, and works really well in our rain garden.
Another shrub that I love is Clethra ulnifolia. Quick plug for the plant toolbox that we use, NCSU plant toolbox. It says its native range is damp thickets, which I thought, I just never seen that before. But a nice mass of these will throw its scent 20, 30 feet. I mean, the first garden I went to that had a mass of these, I think it was Mount Cuba. I was like halfway down a hillside. I was like, what's that? And then like halfway up the hill, there was like 6 Clethra, and I was like, oh, there you go. So really sweet nectar is putting off that scent, and apparently it's like a very good nectar for pollinators. So it's a very rich nectar. It's a low maintenance summer bloomer. You can prune it if you'd like, but it doesn't need to be pruned.
Yeah, and again, tons of cultivars of that. It's a great plant for lots of situations. One of my favorites that's behind us in our rain garden is Hypericum lobocarpum, and I can hold up a piece and test Alexander's camera skills. This one has already flowered. It's got the classic Hypericum red flowers on it, and these are the spent blooms. That, to me, adds a lot of interest to this. You have that nice kind of willowy green foliage, and if you look even closer, the stems, the bark is a little bit peely, but I think to me that adds a lot of kind of winter interest. This guy is kind of tardily deciduous, but it'll drop off most of its leaves. You'll get a little bit of yellow fall color. Those seed pods will turn a kind of a nice brown and persist into the winter. Again, winter, spring, summer, fall interest. That's what we really like. Hypericums in general are really tough plants. They're very, very soil adaptable. I was pleasantly surprised when I saw this one here. I wasn't familiar with this species, but it's been in my eye, and I always check on it throughout the growing season. It just thrives in our rain garden. It does really, really well in all of those different types of situations that we've talked about.
Yeah, so many great Hypericum. As Greg mentioned, you might notice Blake and I are on this side of the camera today. That's because Alexander and Carol are back, and we are so happy to have them and their encouragement and their skills. Back to plants, I was going to talk about Itea virginica, which is a plant that I used to confuse with Clethora alnifolia, just because it's like similar enough, but except this one has cascading white spikes, doesn't smell really. And this is a spreader. So as we get into some of these shrubs that are larger or that spread, and we'll get into trees, we're thinking maybe larger rain gardens, or rain gardens that are further set back so you don't need as much varied interest in the herbaceous layer, things where you might be willing to let something take up more space. But the good thing about those suckering roots is that they're great for holding the soil together. So if you're planting something and right off the bat you want it to fill up and hold together, Itea, obedient plant, some of these plants that are kind of aggressive spreaders are great for that first round to get things established. Then later you can go in and take some stuff out and say it's time to make this interesting now that there's an established root system in my rain garden. Anything else I wanted to say about this? Yeah, don't leave Itea virginica unchecked for years. It may become dominant. But yeah, really tolerant plant.
It's a great one. It's a great one. Cyrilla racemiflora is the next one I want to talk about. It's another native that's kind of underutilized from a small shrub, multi-stem, small tree perspective. There's a lot of work being done with some different cultivars. We've got several different ones kind of scattered throughout the garden. Its common name is swamp TT. I'm not sure where it gets that name from. I've never heard it called that. Cyrilla is what I've always heard it referred to as. It's a great pollinator, profuse flowers late summer that persist into late fall. Those spent flower blooms will form these nice kind of racemes that persist to give it a whole kind of another different texture. Very, very wet soil tolerant, can take dry soil, can take heavy soils. Summer bloomer, just a really, really good plant and perfect for these kinds of situations.
I think I want to touch on a little bit. We can do this after trees. Management, how you might manage a rain garden. You want to do that after trees?
Sure.
Okay, sorry. Taxodium distichum, the bald cypress, a great big plant. I love this. It's one of the first things that probably got me interested in plants because of those big knees that you see coming up out of the water. I mean, it's designed to breathe, which is really cool. It makes you think about plants as these living, breathing creatures. So great for rain gardens or the edges of a pond. So we're thinking larger scale now, because if it's a small rain garden, you're going from something that was full sun to, once that taxodium gets bigger, that's a part shade to dappled shade garden. So that's really going to change the local conditions. But a fantastic texture on the bark and the trunk. Again, really nice interest coming from the knees. And I love that fine green needle foliage. And do they have nice fall color?
Yeah, deciduous conifer, rusty red, late fall into winter. Sometimes they drop all their needles. Sometimes they hold on to them for a long time. But it's good. But it's also good to keep in mind that the size of that, because they can get quite large. And there's cultivars. There's small ones that might be a better fit for that. And ending with a tree behind us, and in our opening shot, this nice river birch, Betula nigra. This is a cultivar called Dickinson, and surprise of surprises, it's one that was developed in South Dakota. So it's a more of a cold tolerant one. I'm not real sure how we came by it. That's going to require some digging after the show on my part, but it's done quite well here, and they tend to grow kind of fast. This one I think is kind of a little bit slower growing for whatever reason, but this is one to think about with scale too, because mature ones can reach 20 feet, maybe just as wide. And as they get older, they'll lose some of that really pretty bark appeal for some people. From a maintenance perspective, they can drop a lot of twigs as well. But it's hard to beat that foliage that they get in the fall a nice yellow color, and the bark is second to none in the realm of trees that have kind of flaking bark. There's one called Little King that is not so little, but in the realm of big 20-foot maturity, 30-foot maturity. These will get maybe 15 feet tall and about as wide. I've seen those used in this type of situation from a smaller scale perspective.
It's probably like 20 feet tall, but what's really special about Little King, and I want to, yeah, it's tight. It's this like perfect, like picturesque
little dome.
It's like if it was miniature, it would win a flower show, but it's not.
Yeah.
I like to talk about that plant because we never like can get out there to see it. It's tucked away in the southwest corner of the Arboretum. Like you might never see it unless you go specifically out there to see it. But
it's worth a visit.
Yeah, it's cool.
Worth a visit.
So briefly, we're just going to talk about managing these areas. We kind of want these to be low maintenance areas, again, so that you're not having to walk in as much. So that could mean once or twice a year you are going in to do the edits. Mm-hmm. But other than that, just as things die off or in that late winter, early spring before things are going to flush again, especially with grasses, you go in with a weed whacker and you cut stuff low enough so that everything else has a chance to get some sun and sprout back up.
Yep.
I think those are the big things.
That's it. There's no such thing as a no maintenance landscape. Rain gardens are about as close as you get, and there's a lot of threshold of tolerance. If you want it to be more manicured, more ornamental, you can definitely do that. If you want it to be something you plant just to manage runoff, just to manage water, and you don't do anything to it, there's that extreme as well. There's both of those dynamics that occur. I've seen ones that have been planted and never touched again. I kind of like somewhere in the middle where there's some ornamental interest and a little bit of change, and maybe take out things that might get too aggressive.
And in the interest of thinking like very long term, 20 years type of thinking, over time, if this water isn't being filtered in any way by plants upstream, if you're getting a lot of erosion coming, eventually this rain garden is going to fill up.
Yeah.
The soil isn't going to be how you initially intended.
Yep.
And then it's not going to drain as well. The grade will change. It won't be able to deal with as much water as it originally did.
Yep.
So thinking about either making a chance to scoop that out or something along the lines of redoing the rain garden,
Yep.
or just thinking about managing a little bit of the water upstream can help extend the life of your rain garden.
That's a good point. So that's the bulk of that's the plant palette. There certainly are a lot more that we could talk about. I don't know what we're in realm of talking to the audience, or if we're at a point where we say sayonara and we'll see you next time.
Might be safest.
Honestly. There were a couple of questions. Edward wanted to know, what is the height of Monarda fistulosa?
What is the height of Monarda fistulosa?
2 to 4 feet.
Beautiful.
And that's a good, there's a lot of cultivated ones. A lot of those suffer from powdery mildew and other things. I don't like the dwarf ones that have come out. Monarda fistulosa has always been a strong performer.
Yeah, the straight species is.
Always does wonderfully.
And who knows? There's probably a couple of good cultivars out there.
There are lots of good ones, but that's a sure bet.
Right.
That's a sure bet.
Edward would also like to know about the Hypericum lobocarpum, sun or shade.
The Hypericum, yes. It flowers better in sun. It's the one right here behind Blake and myself. You're going to get more flowers in the sun. It can take a little bit of shade, but it likes more sun. And Hypericum in general are kind of like that. There's some smaller ones that can take more shade. But if you want that profusion of flowers, if you want the bees that accompany those flowers, it's going to be happier and more sun.
For sure. Neil would like to know, how do you manage a rain garden during a drought?
How do you manage a rain garden during a drought? A lot of that's going to depend on your threshold of tolerance. I have, when we had first planted one that I did at another garden, we kept a sprinkler on it for a season. Once it got through that season, it was on its own. It was every man for himself. And most of these plants can kind of take that ebb and flow of those sorts of things. They're on the tougher edge of the spectrum. They don't need the kick gloves and a lot of that finer tooth handling. So that's part of the planning for these is that.
And you're not going to want to baby your rain garden too much. Like Greg said, the best strategy is to, for a season, water it. Once things are established, don't, and let that rain really be the thing that trains them to send their roots deep and wide, because that will help sustain them when that drought comes. If you baby them up until that point, they will not be able to take a drought. And you'll have that super shallow root system, and that's not doing anybody any good.
Nope. A lot of tough love.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, that is all of the questions that we have for today. So thank you, Evan and Greg, for pulling together this program. Tell us a little bit about rain gardens.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the Midweek program. We will be back next week. Evan will be talking about the new South American garden that he installed this year. So that should be really wonderful. We will see you all next time. Y'all take care.